So I did this little training a couple of weeks ago for women who were asking me how they can do more impromptu speaking on their feet. And I realized that this is something that I learned by doing. But in retrospect, there's probably some frameworks and some tips that I can give you so that you can practice at home, or you can practice in the comfort of a friend who wants to be your accountability partner. So that is what this video is. It's my training that I did a couple weeks ago for a group of women on LinkedIn Live. Okay, great. All right, folks, it is 12 o'clock. Welcome. Thank you for electing to spend your next hour with me. What I'm promising to do in this next hour is really give you some frameworks and some tips on how to be more confident when you are asked to speak impromptu or just on the fly. And I'll tell you a little bit about how this event came about. Everybody's getting back into in-person events. They're doing more toasts at weddings. They are in front of their teams starting April if they aren't already. And people are hungry, just so hungry to be able to meet in person. And that also means that more and more folks, as they're getting promoted or they're being moved to the face of their new business unit, they're being asked to speak impromptu. So of all the inbound requests that are coming my way, this is one of the most popular ones. So that's why I decided to do a live training on this today. I actually wanted to share about a story as people are joining about a time that I was asked to speak impromptu for the first time. Mind you, I've been a news reporter, a news anchor in New York City for 20 years, but very, very early in my career, I was just a cub reporter, and someone decided to put me on the red carpet for a film premiere. And there was an order to the way that I did business news on television, and that was sort of second nature for me. But all of a sudden, this microphone was being shoved in my face, and I had to talk about a film that I had not seen yet, but I really had to talk about the importance of that film and what it meant for it to be screened in New York City for Indian Americans. And I pretty much blathered out a bunch of stuff about being Bengali and that this means a lot to my heritage. And I remember my face getting hot and I could feel a draft in my back, and the New York smells that are common on the streets were overwhelming me. And I got off camera and I thought, my God, what in the world did I just say? So if I had to go back and do it again today, 20 years later, after I've been doing this for so long, I would have walked in with a structure in my head and immediately put that into place before I even began to speak. So those are some of the structures that I'm actually going to share with you today. If you are somebody who's just joining us, I want to tell you, if you're being called upon to do more talks on your feet, how do you structure your talk on the fly? How do you practice impromptu speaking at home? And how do you captivate a room, even if you have to do it on short notice? I love to provide a little bit of an agenda so you have a flow for the next hour and how we're going to be spending it together. First, I'm going to tell you who I am. Next, I'm going to share structures that you can use. What if you're practicing from home? You really want the comfort of that and you want to be able to practice from home. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to use. How to be compelling on short notice. There's some things that you can do with your nonverbal communication to be able to transmit that. And then this is my favorite part. This is where I get to take questions from you and do a bit of laser coaching on the fly. And if I promise, if you stay with me all the way to the end, I'm also going to offer you a little bonus. If you're looking to figure out a way to get more speaking opportunities, I've created a little video that I'm going to share with you at the end and share next steps on how to engage with me. All right, so let's get into it. So who am I? I have been a business news anchor for mainstream networks here in New York City. I'm one of those gals that's stationed on the stock exchange floor, and I'm giving you hourly updates on the markets. What does that really mean? I just had basically a bunch of screens around me, and I had to be able to tell a compelling story about 3 stocks every hour and do it without any kind of script. And so that's my superpower, is being able to speak on the fly. For the last 10 years on the side, I've been running a women's leadership platform called the Women's Leadership Academy. I really forged my career on my own. I was born to Indian immigrant parents who truly did not understand their little girl telling them that she wanted to go and become a news anchor. It was just too far from like what they knew and what was familiar for them. So I left home at 18 and I paid for college by myself, and I paid for grad school by myself, and I paid for every move around the country to come to New York and live out my dream. But I really had to learn best practices around networking And then where was I going to go to practice them when I was just learning? So I decided to create a platform just for that, to teach women today, executive women, how best practices around networking and how to get to that next level. And then finally, I teach a masterclass because more and more people, given my training, have been asking me throughout the pandemic to teach them how to be a more confident public speaker. So that's kind of where a lot of the inbound inquiries are coming in, asking me to do this kind of training. The structures. So there are 3 different structures that you can use if you have been asked in the next 5 minutes to give a talk. The first one is past, present, future. Past, present, future means there was a time in 2010 when I was deciding that I was going to launch this business on the side. I knew nothing about being an entrepreneur, but I remember speaking to a friend and a colleague who said that when she first went from being in-house as an interior decorator to going out on her own, she hired a coterie of coaches, a branding coach, a communications coach, a business coach, because she didn't feel like entrepreneurship needed to be any more difficult than it should be. So in the past, I had no idea what I was doing. In the present, I have hired a series of coaches that are helping to put in systems and processes so I can be more effective as an entrepreneur. And my future in the next 2 years is that I really hope to double the revenue that I made this past year. So that is an example of how you use past, present, future as a quick framework that you can use when you're being called to speak on your feet. All right, the next framework is cause, effect, solution. So, what could be something that's a cause? Well, I had parents that were not the greatest money managers. As a result of that, I really had to unlearn a lot of their behaviors on how to save and how to retain money. So the cause was I got really not so great messages about how to spend money. The effect was that I was spending money frivolously and I wasn't putting away money for a rainy day fund. The solution was for me to get a financial advisor, and there are plenty that you can talk to that don't necessarily require you to have a $250,000 investment, that will offer advice to you pro bono on how you can start to take care of your financial future. Cause, effect, solution. And the final framework that I really love is before the event, after the event, and what was the result. Probably the most, pervasive example I can give is the pandemic and what it's done for us in the last 2 years. So before the pandemic, I, no joke, was doing like 4 events a month in person, which meant I had to find venues, which meant that I had to do marketing, which meant that it was very capital intensive. But what I have learned through the pandemic is that we can connect this way. We can connect virtually, and everybody has become more comfortable with that. The result is that maybe now I'm going to do 1 event a quarter that's live and in person, and do 3 others that are virtual, so that I can still continue to connect with women all around the world and all around the country. So that's an example of before the event, the pandemic, and the result that has come out of that. Now, let's say you've gotten up on the podium or you've just been called in front of your team and the wheels are turning. You need to buy a little bit of time. This is a perfect opportunity to share the structure that you're about to share. I think of it as like an agenda for the meeting. I'm going to tell you a past, present, and future story. You're really just buying time in the back of your head so that you can get your thoughts in order. So those are the structures that you can use when you're up there and you're having to speak on the fly. All right, so now let's say, well, Joya, I really don't want to be put in that position. I want to learn how to practice at home. So what can you offer me in the way of tips on how I can practice at home? So this is something that I learned from improv classes. In the early days, they would throw out a word and you would just have to riff on it, right? So let's say I threw out the word horse. The only thing I can think of when I think about horses is what happened to Christopher Reeves. He was in a terrible horseback riding accident and then he was paralyzed. And I just see him in his wheelchair. So I came to the conclusion that I really needed to overcome my fear of riding horses. So I created an event last year where we went horseback riding. I overcame my fear. And today I am really excited to be able to do that event this July. That's how I use a 1-word prompt. Now, you might be like, all right, Joya, well, where do I get these 1-word prompts? There's a game called Chat Pack, which you can buy off of Amazon. I think you can just Google it and buy Chat Pack, but it has just basically a stack of cards with words on it. You can play with your family, you can play with a friend. Just pull out one word and think about what could be a really quick riff that you could do, and just learn to practice of what it's like to do improv in that way. The second tip that I'll offer you is to record yourself on your phone. When I first start to train a lot of women in public speaking, they're like, oh, I hate my voice. I hate my nose. I hate my hair. I say like too much. Okay, here's the deal. If you were a Victoria's Secret model and I was coming to you because you are the ultimate benchmark of beauty, I could judge you on your nose and your hair and all that other good stuff. But what I'm coming to you for is because you're a fantastic graphic designer. I'm coming to you because you are a fantastic change management consultant. I am interested in what's up here. So if you can start to do a thought dump daily for 1 minute into your phone and really get used to seeing yourself on screen, that means that you start to overcome, oh, I hate my nose, I hate my hair, I hate all these other things, and really start to focus on the content that you are delivering. And when you record it, the important thing is to not record it and walk away, to play it back and really think about what is it that you see. Are you using filler words? Is taking up some of that white space? Are you breaking eye contact? Eye contact is very important, because when you aren't giving people eye contact, you're giving them permission to think about their laundry, what they're going to pick up at the grocery store, when they're picking up their kids. So eye contact is very, very powerful. Are you playing with your hair? So this is a really good feedback mechanism when you're practicing from home for you to be able to pick up on your tics and your mannerisms and be able to correct in real time. So those are some things that you can do when you're practicing from home. All right, now you've just been called upon to speak on very, very short notice. What are some tips that you could use? Well, the first thing to think about is, who is your audience? If I was speaking to a bunch of high school kids today on how to get a job, that would be a very different talk than I would be giving to the director of public communications for a Big Four consulting company on how she'd become chief marketing officer by July. Those would be two very different talks. So you really got to think about who your audience is and toggle your language based on that. When I was on CNN, I would be on many different CNN products. I would be on CNN International. I would be on CNN Flagship. I would be on Headline News. And each of those had a very different audience that I had to service inside of an hour. So if I was talking about Kellogg's, and Kellogg's just reported their earnings, if I was talking to a headline news audience where it's a mom getting her kids ready for school in the morning, and I know that the news is really just white noise in the background, but she might have Kellogg's in her stock portfolio, so she's interested. So I would talk about the fact that Kellogg's did better than expected. And by the way, they're launching a new protein-heavy cereal next month, because they realize that everyone's paying attention to their carbs, and it's got some bells and whistles for kids. If I was doing something for the very sophisticated investor audience, I would not only talk about their earnings statement, I would talk about, what's the 200-day moving average for the stock? What is the guidance that they're providing? How is the macroeconomics of the situation affecting Kellogg's right now? What's going on in trend setting? I would get a lot more granular for the sophisticated investor that's really interested in a much more in-depth sort of read on what's going on with Kellogg's, and they might have it in their portfolio. So really consider who your audience is when you're speaking on the fly. The second thing is, what is your takeaway? If dinosaurs were destroying the earth and you had one sentence that you could get out and leave the audience with to get the client, to get the sale, to get the next meeting, what is that one takeaway that you want to leave the audience with? And really think about that, and then reverse engineer from there. The third tip is, and I teach this in my masterclass, is to tell a story. And the more personal that story is, the better. Here's why. When you tell a personal story, you engage all three brains. We as human beings have three brains. If you were to do a PowerPoint presentation and just rattle off a bunch of statistics, just a bunch of statistics, you would be engaging two brains. But if you were to tell me a story with sight and sound and smell, like I did when I told you that story at the very beginning about me being on the red carpet and having no idea what to say, that is when you engage all three brains. And it really just comes down to design. Thousands of years ago, when our ancestors were transmitting information to each other, they sat around a campfire, and that is how they shared information. It's by way of story. And we haven't actually come that far as human beings. So if you want to really persuade, if you really want to have influence over an audience, tell a personal story because you're creating the experience for them. The second thing I'll tell you about telling a really compelling personal story is that it's easier for you. Like, why wouldn't you just make it easier for you to be able to tell a story? You lived it. It was a lived experience. It's going to be a heck of a lot easier for you to be able to share. And the third thing why a personal story is important is that it makes you more memorable. It's going to increase your audience's retention. And it's something that is unique to you. There are no new stories, but there are unique stories to you. And that's something that you can really put your stamp on when you get up to share a personal story. A lot of women will ask me, well, where does my personal story fit into my leadership? And that's something that we can work on in the masterclass. Here's a big one. Do not ramble. Less is more. You want to share one story, one message, and that is it. And you might be asking, well, what does that mean? One story, one message. I could tell you a million things about horses and that day that I went horseback riding, but I prefer to tell you just high level, a micro moment when I remembered what Christopher Reeve looked like in that wheelchair paralyzed and what it did to my perception of riding horses. I was firmly of the belief that that was going to happen to me. And after I actually did it, the horses were super gentle. I obviously lived to tell. And so that debunked any of my theories that I had about of what horseback riding does. One story, one message. Eye contact, I talked about this earlier. 93% of our communication is actually nonverbal. So people are hearing you, but they're also seeing you. What kind of energy are you bringing to this? Are you maintaining eye contact? Are you being enthusiastic about what you're talking about? Are you confident about what you're talking about? Even if your content isn't great, the way with which you share it is going to speak volumes. And so if you look at that statistic, 93% of your communication is nonverbal. That is really, really another sort of feedback loop of why you need to see yourself on camera, record yourself every single day so you can see the kind of energy that you're coming across with. All right. So I said to you that I was offering a bonus, which is how to create your own speaking opportunities. I made this little video. So if you go to YouTube and you search for Joya Dass Leadership, there's a video there on how to boost your confidence in public speaking. And really what I've done there is create a very sort of step-by-step 11 steps to creating thought leadership so that you can, in fact, invite in those speaking opportunities. So I promised you to stay through to the end, and I wanted to share that with you. Also, a thank you. I offer a public speaking masterclass for executive women. You might be someone who's just come into a leadership position. You might be somebody who's looking to build a personal brand. Maybe you own your own business and you really just need to be the face of your business and you need to be able to make videos or do a webinar like this. So I can really teach you how to do that. The next cohort kicks off on April 13th. It goes for 7 weeks. And it is from 7 to 8:30 because I have a bunch of folks that are joining from the West Coast and Mountain Time. So they wanted to make it so that they could all join. All right. So this is the laser coaching part. This is where I take your questions and I'm able to kind of see what it is that you would love for me to be able to troubleshoot. So if you could put your questions in the chat, I can start to ask them there. So the first question that's come in is, I use a lot of filler words. How do I get rid of them? Great question. I get this one a lot. Again, I'm going to refer you back to recording yourself. That is going to be your number one feedback loop to see how and when you're deploying the ums, the likes, let me tell you, any nervous tics that you might have. Also, it's important to learn how to leverage the pause. And this is a very advanced form of public speaking. But if you notice some really seasoned public speakers, They have no qualms about stopping and letting things land, for emphasis. So let's say, for example, that you have all of a sudden gotten off track with what it is that you think you were going to say. You have your notes in front of you, but you're losing your train of thought. Stop, take a breath. Instead of using filler words, really leverage that silence. And here's why. Silence is really going to force everybody to look up from whatever it is that they're doing and look at you. Nothing is more of a showstopper than the silence. Use that moment to just gather your thoughts, even as be vulnerable with the audience. Like, I just need a second, and then get back on track. And the reason that this is much better and lands so much better than using filler words to kind of fill up the silence. We as human beings don't love silence, but if you can become aware of that and then start to really just use that to your advantage, that can be a huge, huge thing. So the next question is, I don't feel like I have anything to say. Who in the world is going to listen to me? Another great question. Okay, so the thing is, I said this earlier, there are no news stories. However, you can tell unique stories that are personal to you. How do you do that? Well, I remember when I was at my first station, which was Casper, Wyoming, population 50,000. And my general manager took me aside and said, Joya, you're trying to be the version of a news anchor that you think you should be, instead of just being yourself. Just remember that you are the most unique thing that you bring to the table. So, given that sort of piece of counsel, that was something that I started to channel, being more of me versus what I think a public speaker should be or what I think an anchor should be. So if you can really think about what makes you unique and put that down on paper, and then think about what is your brand, like what is your superpower that really sets you apart from everyone else, and then really play on that, I think that's going to really help you to be a really compelling public speaker. How do you get rid of anxiety before you do a speech? Great question, Kathy Ann. Thank you. So I have something called a completion board. A completion board is a collage of all the laurels that I've ever gotten, all the awards that I've ever gotten, notes that people have written me saying, you've helped me so much to get this job or to get this opportunity. And I have them all assembled on a board. And right before I go into a talk, like, I was actually nervous about doing this today because I haven't done a LinkedIn Live before, moment of vulnerability, and I wasn't sure about the technical aspects of this. So I looked at my completion board as a reinforcement mechanism that I've done this for so long. I'm a seasoned professional. I should be able to do this. But let's talk science for a second. When you look at all the things that you have already done, your brain starts to connect with what's possible with what's impossible. So right now you're thinking, oh my God, I have to give this speech and this feels impossible. When you take a look at your completion board and all the laurels that have been showered on you, all the things that you've done for other people, you start to transmit a different kind of energy, a whole different kind of energy. And so that is something that you can use as a quick fix. If you can put that board together, look at it for 5 minutes before you get up on stage or you have to do that sales call. The other thing is a longer term play, Kathy Ann. I am a big advocate for a daily meditation practice and a weekly yoga practice. I know for a fact that when I turn to face the camera, on weeks that I have not done yoga or haven't done meditation, I feel my brain is just formatted differently. So for me to get rid of any of my anxiety before I face a camera or I get in front of a microphone is to have a regular breath practice, whether it be yoga or meditation, because I notice that the quality of my ability to gather my thoughts is very, very different when I've been doing that for weeks versus not having done that at all. I hope that's helpful to you. I would love to have some more questions here. I'm with you for the next 40 minutes. I've got a question here about, I didn't quite answer the question. I'm not famous. What can I do that's going to stand out and break through to people? Personal stories. Every one of us have had a story that is unique to you. I'll give you an example. I had a student who was interviewing for jobs, and she was really having a hard time breaking through from or breaking past interview number one and getting on to interview number two. And so we really in my masterclass really dug deep and thought about stories that demonstrated her leadership. And at one point, it's the first time that she'd shared this, she was homeless. And she was really keen to share what she would have wanted in that moment when she was homeless from her peers around her. And one of the things that she wanted was options. And so for her to be able to share that in an interview is immediately going to change the perception of the person sitting across the table from you. You've had the courage to be that vulnerable about a time in your life when things were not perfect. But what was your understanding of having been homeless? In this case, she said that she wanted to have options. She wanted for people to offer her options rather than to just summarily dismiss her. So if you can actually talk about something that's so unique to you, nobody else can share that story. That was unique to her. And then share your understanding of having gone through that experience. That story is unique to you. Your understanding of having gone through that is also unique to you. And so that is my answer to why would anybody listen to me? I'm not famous. So someone's just asking, what is the best way to get over the uncomfortability of seeing yourself on camera? Sure. I talked about this earlier. I like to instruct my students to do a daily thought dump. So you have your phone and you take just for 1 minute every day, can you do a thought dump of what went well? Or what went great? What did you fail at? Really getting into the practice of seeing yourself on camera. Like I said, a lot of women will say, well, I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like the way my nose looks. I don't like the way that my teeth look. All of those are valid. However, I am coming to you because I really want to learn what's up here. I want to be able to leverage your strengths and what makes you great at what you do. So I'm not, if unless you're a Victoria's Secret model, I'm not coming to you because you're a benchmark of beauty. You're also not Dan Rather, so I'm not going to judge you for having a news anchor voice. I am, however, going to only be riveted if you're giving me valuable content. So if you can record yourself every day, you start to overcome your lack of comfort with seeing yourself on camera. You're able to really start to focus on adding value to the person that's going to be seeing you on the other side. And that's really where the rubber hits the road. We have become a society where our attention span is maybe 3 seconds. So if you're not adding value right out of the gate, you run the risk of losing your audience. So you really want to be thinking about that above all else. But that daily thought dump is a great tip. One other thing I recommend is to go into low stakes environment and start to practice speaking. So what if your local bookstore, now that things are opening up, is hosting a book talk? Raise your hand and ask a question to the author. It's low stakes. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you are, really starting to flex that muscle in places that are outside of your comfort zone. Maybe strike up a conversation at Trader Joe's. Those lines are always wrapped all the way around the store. Turn around to the person behind you and maybe strike up a conversation. Start to really leverage those situations that are happening to you every day as an opportunity to practice. Zena asked me, hi, Zena. How much time do you think it takes to prepare well for someone who's just getting started? Maybe each of the steps: content, rehearsing, recording, breath work. All right. If you're just starting out, I like to offer you a framework. The beginning, the middle, the ending. So let's say, for example, Zena, you're going to tell a personal story. And I know Zena because she's started a brick and mortar business on the Upper West Side. The beginning would be, I want to tell you about biohacking. You may not know what biohacking is, but I'm here to share with you. And then, so that's the promise. That's the beginning. The middle can be Zena's first time that she even happened upon OsteoStrong, the OsteoStrong movement, and when she first learned about biohacking and what it did for her personally. Maybe she had a backache and it helped her alleviate that. Maybe she had a torn meniscus and this biohacking really helped to alleviate any of the pain so she could get back to running again. The middle should be a personal story about a moment in time when she first discovered biohacking. It supports the promise that we've made. Now, at the very end, the takeaways. This framework requires you to tell me what you understood about going through that experience of learning about biohacking for the first time. So it could be that all of a sudden you realize that there's a different, more holistic way for pain management. Number two, you realize that this is a mechanism that everybody can use, but you want to be able to get the word out, which is why you invested in OsteoStrong and became a silent investor in a brick and mortar on the Upper West Side. Number three could be that this could be really a community effort. So many of us are seeking more holistic practices instead of going under the knife. So how can this be something that's additive to the work that you're already doing with a physical therapist or with your acupuncturist? I'm just rattling off a bunch of examples, but again, these understandings that you share are the ending. So the beginning, promise. I'm going to tell you about this today. The middle is a story, a personal story that's a micro moment from your time. And then the ending is no more than 3 takeaways of your understanding of having gone through that. Now, Zena, if you can record yourself doing that beginning, middle, and end and start to see where the chinks are in your armor, that is probably a great place to start as somebody who's a beginner. Of course, you can also enroll in my masterclass. And what we're going to do is we're going to workshop all of these stories so that you can walk out of that class with 6 stories about your leadership that you can then go on to share with other people. All right, here's the next question. I love this. This person says that they have to present a white paper to a team and they're not sure how exactly to calm their nerves before having to do that. Well, this is really where the breath work starts to come into play. I know for a fact the person that's asking this question has a wellness business on the side, and meditation and yoga is a huge part of what makes up that business. So if you can really start to pull on those levers, at any given time, you can pull breath from your diaphragm. Most of us, when we're talking, are really only pulling air from right up here, very, very shallow. But if you can stop and pull breath from your diaphragm, which sits just above your stomach, and just really actually feel that breath come up through your trachea and your esophagus, and then exhale it. That does amazing things for your amygdala. Your amygdala and the limbic part of your brain are the oldest part of the human brain. I'm invoking a little bit of science here because I love the science behind why things happen. And that part of your brain was truly designed for fight or flight. When our ancestors were hunting and gathering, there were real threats to their existence. Animals that could kill them, fire, I don't know. There's all kinds of things. And your brain is truly designed to always be looking for those threats. So the minute that you are now getting ready to step up on stage and all of those red flares are going up in your body, it's because your body has been designed, your brain has been designed to keep you safe. And so when you start to breathe, you are sending oxygen to your brain. You're sending messages to the rest of your nervous system that everything is okay, and that you are safe and that you are calm. So it's a little bit of a primal thing that your body actually goes into. But if you can kind of hit system override with your breath work, that's when you're doing yourself a whole world of good. All right, here's another question. How and when is it valuable to do a practice session in front of a mock audience? For example, if she's giving a webinar to someone else. Well, this is when you can pull in your kids. I know that you have some teenage kids. This is when you can pull in a friend. I'm a big believer in having an accountability partner for everything. So if you can get a willing friend who's going to give you honest feedback and you can run through what it is that you're going to be practicing or presenting to a group end to end, that's going to do you a world of good. I remember when I was giving my first TED Talk, and mind you, I had 6 weeks of training with a storyline coach on drafting and redrafting the story and the talk that I was ultimately going to give. However, in those 24 to 48 hours before I was about to give the talk, I grabbed every single friend that I could, and I ran that entire TED Talk from beginning to end so that I could get feedback, especially on like, what was I doing? Like, am I using my hands too much? Am I batting my eyelashes too much? I mean, things that I know to course correct for today. I practiced it multiple times in front of friends so that I could be a well-oiled machine by the time I got up on that stage and I was giving that TED Talk. So I hope that's helpful for you, Zena. Thank you for really leveraging this session today and making the most of it. I'm open to more questions, folks. We have another 25 minutes here. If you are here, I would love to get some more questions from you. All right, so this next person is asking me, what if it's a topic that I don't know? What if it's that you're on a panel and all of a sudden somebody in the audience has asked you a question that you don't know the answer to? Great. Okay, so I'm a big fan of having scripts in your back pocket that you can use and pull out to be able to exit gracefully from that question. Thank you for that question. I would have to research that and get back to you. Or thank you for that question. I'm afraid that is outside my expertise, and I would have to defer to one of my colleagues on a better answer for that. Or let me take your email. I would love to do a little bit of research and get back to you. Now, what if it's a question that you just don't want to answer? I think politicians are great at this because you can ask them a question, but they're still going to go ahead and talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about. So if you're in a situation where you are asked a question that you don't want to answer, you can say, I'm sorry, I don't have all the information at my fingertips right now to be able to give a sufficient answer to that. So I'm going to respectfully decline. Lucy asks a great question. What is your advice for bringing your best energy? Do you think the presenters need to give extra energy so they don't seem flat and they don't seem boring? Lucy, I'm going to answer this in a couple of ways. Earlier in this webinar, I was talking about the fact that your energy is something that people pick up on. 70 to 93% of our communication is nonverbal. I'm just getting my computer cord because my computer's about to die. So you want to make sure that you are bringing your A game to any talk because people are picking up on your body language. So I'm a big fan of creating what I explained earlier as the completion board. This is a collage of all the notes that people have written you because you did right by them, or you changed their life, or you gave them a job, or you got an award. Because what happens is that your brain starts to connect the impossible with what's possible, what's already come. And so I always like to look at my completion board before I'm about to give an important pitch, or even before I came on this webinar today. Extra energy. I think that if you can give a very powerful story and you can engage sight, sound, smell, taste, what are you effectively doing? You are taking me by the hand, the listener, and giving me a front row seat in that story or that experience that you are sharing. And when you create that experience for me, that is when you have the power to influence. That is when you have the power to persuade. That is when you have the power to really come across as not flat and not boring. Again, I'm going back to the way that our brains are wired. If you were to just get up and give me a bunch of data on how your unit did in the last quarter, you're really only going to engage two of my brains. But if you start to tell me a story, last quarter at this time last year, we were doing X. But then we put in this system and process. We hired this person. And this year, I'm happy to report that year over year, we have been able to raise our revenue by 25%. That, if you can be really picky and choosy about the statistics that you're going to share, the most important statistics that you need to share, but you nest that inside of a story, you're going to, I promise you, not be flat and not be boring. Do you need to bring energy to that? Sure. But I think that if you can be much more illustrative of that story that you're going to share and engage all of my senses, you're never going to run the risk of being flat and boring. And also remember to stick on one story, one message. The easiest way to lose your audience is when you start to ramble or you start to go off on tangents, and then your audience just can't follow you anymore. That's when you start to, when you think about like water, you can fill up a cup way up to the top, and then there comes a breaking point where that bubble will break. And so that bubble will break when you start to overload that cup with way too much information. All right, the next question is, I really want to be able to influence my team. I've just come into a new team. The culture is already built in. How do I start to override all of the scripts that they already have about me? Great question. I would say, and this really becomes more of a leadership consideration than it becomes a public speaking consideration, but stay with me. At that point, I would really take each person on that team aside for a one-on-one and establish a cadence of how often I'm going to check in with them. But where the public speaking checks in is that it's really, really important to ask a lot of questions and do a lot of listening. Again, pay attention to the nonverbal. If you find that the person's holding back, what is it that can you repeat the last 3 words that they said? Mirror their body language, mirror the way they're talking to you, and start to get them in a comfortable place. So oftentimes, because I was on the trading floor, I was being asked to interview the CEO that was ringing either the opening bell or the closing bell, which meant that I pretty much had the commercial break to get familiar with the company, get the guy in front of me comfortable, and have that energy translate on camera when they said 3, 2, 1, you're on. And so I would really ask a lot of questions and try to find something that was like a connecting dot. I happen to really love scotch. And so, if I could talk about like what their favorite scotch was. I also love to travel. What was the last travel adventure that they'd been on? I really tried to find some kind of common thread so I could develop rapport in those 30 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes. So then that would translate into the kind of energy that I would transmit once we were actually into the interview. I recently just interviewed Cal Penn on stage at a high school in Greenwich, and him and I spent like 30 minutes backstage really getting to know each other. And I asked him a bunch of questions about actors that he'd worked with and this and that. And so by the time we got on stage, everyone felt like they were just eavesdropping on 2 old friends having a chat. So again, Lucy, to go back to your question about how to not be flat and boring, the camaraderie and the rapport that you might have with your counterparts on stage, if you have, panelists that you're working with, that can also be a great asset if you can start to develop that rapport when you're off stage or for the few minutes that you have before you go on. All right, we're at 12:41. I know I'm a fast talker, so if anybody has more questions, please send them my way. I've been talking now for a good 42 minutes, and now I know the pain that I subject other speakers to when they're talking to my women's leadership platform. I'll probably stay on for maybe another 5 minutes to take one more question. All right, here's another great question. I am not from this country, so I have a lot of nerves about English not being my first language. I have a couple of foreign nationals who have gone through my masterclass, and this has been a challenge. One woman in particular, she was Brazilian, and one of the big issues that she had when she first moved to this country is that she recognized that the question, "How are you?" is actually a rhetorical question. People don't in America actually want to know what the answer is. But in Brazil, culturally, when people would ask you, "How are you?" you could be on the bus, but the other person would strap in for what could be an hour-long conversation. And so it was really hard for her when she first emigrated to this country, and people would ask her in the grocery store, "How are you?" And she would actually launch into it. The clerk would start to recoil because she was like, "Lady, like I didn't really want the full Monty here." So I think that starting to pick up on the nuances, your audience is always giving you feedback. So how can you start to read the audience? For me, I can't right now in a virtual room, but I'm always reading the audience. Who's looking away? Who's turned their camera off? Who's on their phone? Who's not engaged and present? Your audience is giving you feedback, so you can really slow down and start to pay attention to that. That's one thing that I could give you, especially when you're somebody who's from another country and you have a tendency to speak fast. Really, really slow down and learn to leverage the pauses and pay attention to whether or not your audience is still with you. They'll give you cues. They'll be engaged. They'll be giving you eye contact. I think, again, your personal stories are always going to be the most effective way that you're going to be able to be compelling when you're asked to speak on your feet. So if you can dive deep into a personal story and share that, again, it's a lived experience, it's something that you went through, then you are going to be able to pull on those levers to be able to share with your audience. Again, you want to always be thinking about what is the takeaway for the audience. Yes, I went through this experience, but you run the risk of it being a Dear Diary entry if you're just sharing about the first time you emigrated to this country and nobody understood your response to how are you. What is your understanding today when you are in front of a new audience and they're asking you how are you? What is your understanding of having emigrated to a country and now been here for like 10 years? What would you have done differently? And then that's where you're giving a gift to your audience, and they can take those away and possibly even transpose it into their own lives. I hope that's a helpful question to you. Thank you so much, Solange, for that question. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to stay for one more minute. Otherwise, I'm going to offer the final slide for this presentation today. Okay, if you would like to enroll in my masterclass, again, the next cohort starts on April 13th. I typically only have 5 executive women who are enrolled at a time. I like to keep it small. I think women really appreciate the safe container that becomes for the 7 weeks that they're together to be vulnerable and be able to share some of these stories that I'm asking you to share. And think about this, when you're doing something for the first time, your mind is like a muscle. And the more you exercise it, the stronger it's going to get, the more it's going to be able to expand. But when I think about the challenges that I see a lot of women experience when they first come into my classes, is that there's so much content up here, but this is the first time that we've sat down and workshopped it, really connected the dots of how your stories fit into your leadership. And it's probably the first time that you've ever sat down and done this kind of workshopping. So if any and all of this sounds interesting to you and it's something that you would like to explore, I would love for you to be in my next masterclass. My email is up there. It's Joya Dass, and I would love to be able to work with you. Oh, we have one more question that's come in. How much time should I budget to create content for a 45-minute talk and to practice? I think that the first time that you have to do a talk, I would draft everything out on paper end to end. Write out your entire talk. And here's why. A lot of times, think about your purse. Women love to carry big purses, and you're searching around for your house keys and you can't find them and you can't find them. And it's not until you take your entire purse and you dump it out on the countertop that you're like, oh, there's my keys in broad daylight. So I like to think about, like, when you write out a story end to end, that's really effectively dumping your purse out onto the table to see where everything is. So then after that, you're going to probably go through a couple rounds of redrafting that information, because again, you want to stay on one message, one story, and you want to make sure that you're as concise as possible. And then you probably want to start practicing the delivery of that. So how much time should you allocate? I mean, I don't know the speed at which you work, but drafting it end to end and then revising it a couple rounds, that may not be something that you want to sit and do in one go. You might want to draft it, walk away, come back to it. So maybe allocate like a week to just getting it all down on paper and drafting it and revising. And then you want to start thinking about who you can enlist to get in front of to be able to start practicing, so that they can give you that mirror and say, well, I think you're talking too fast, or I'm not sure I really got that point. And so you want to be able to workshop that. Ladies, and I see a few gentlemen here, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to stay on for another 10 minutes. So if anybody wants to ask me a question, I will. But this really concludes my presentation for today. I know that you could have spent your lunch hour in a multitude of places. So I'm really excited that you could spend these last 50 minutes with me. Thank you.